Chapter 5. The poker face officer had long returned to his base, yet before leaving, he didn't forget to remind Tien that the younger man wasn't allowed to wander around the Akag village that held to long tradition. The village's entrance was decorated with a lo kong, an arch made of hard wood or a long shoot of bamboo with a beam over it, with engravings such as a whirligig or a bird. No strangers were allowed to enter without permission, and the tradition stated that the visitors must wait outside until a villager came out to greet them, or they should call out for someone in the village to invite them in as a part of the tribe. But he had arrived in the night through the back entrance. If it was other communities who were more strict, he would be left to sleep roofless and had a real taste of forest camping. Luckily, Papandao village seemed to be open-minded and welcomed changes from the outside world. They'd made the decision to hold this welcome ceremony for the new teacher that evening. Hama Bieng Le volunteered to accompany Tien back to his hut from the waterfall. On the way, the elderly man told him that Captain Fupa had asked him to ask young men in the village to fill water in the earthen jar and cooked the meal even before dawn break. He had no idea, though, why the captain brought Tien to the creek that served as the village's laundry. Tien couldn't help but felt irked that the officer succeeded in pranking him. He gritted his teeth before muttering a sarcastic remark. Perhaps he wanted me to sweat a little. Well, I was surprised that he took on the responsibility of taking care of you. Have you known him before, Crutien? The question stunned him. He hadn't known the captain before, but his heart had. Tien shook his head. Once they arrived at the hut, he thanked the elderly man for giving him freshly cooked, sticky rice and dried salty beef he could fill his stomach with before the evening party. Having nowhere to go, he started with exploring the accommodation. First, he walked to the back of the hut and lifted the galvanized iron lid from the earthen jar to check, curious. Seeing how the jar was filled with fresh water, the handsome face frowned. He knew deep down that the imposing officer was thoughtful and generous, but he couldn't help swearing at him after realizing that he had been tricked to walk a distance for a bath. Fuck! He slammed the lid down to let out his frustration. Luckily, he had his immunosuppressant, otherwise, his limbs would be shaking. Even if he had become physically healthier, his conditions could rebound if he strained himself too much. Tien went to look at the other side of the hut. A small single room built with woven bamboos tight enough to leave no holes to be peered through was topped by a tack roof. It stood alone with a sparse forest as a background. Once he opened the door, an unpleasant odor reeked out and he saw a hole in the ground with a wood plank over it. The plank had a hole in the middle, an opening for human waste. Ian frowned, slamming the door and turning his back on the tiny room. The life here looked more difficult than he had expected. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, feeling discouraged, and returned to the empty space under the hut that served as a high-rise basement. A litter stood underneath the basement. On it stood a brazier that used charcoal as fuel, pot, a pan with a dent, an earthenware steamer, and a wooden jug in a cylinder shape with a lid that he had zero ideas what it was for. The bottom of the pot was blackened, but the interior was clean, ready to use as if someone had already washed it. Maybe it was a message to him that it was time to cook for himself. Tian slumped down on the litter, deflated. When he first joined a scout camp as a child, he was entrusted with a cooking duty that he didn't want to do. It turned out that the rice he made was uncooked, The omelette burnt, and the fried chicken was still bleeding. No one allowed him to do anything after that incident. He would starve to death. Tien was crestfallen and wanted to pack his bags to leave right away. He climbed the crumbling stairs back to his room, but chose to stay outside. The cool breeze and the warm sunlight calmed him down as he sat on the porch, leaning against a pole and hanging his feet down, looking over at the swaying trees. He was slowly falling asleep until a familiar voice spoke up. Tien! It was Staff Sergeant Yod. The soldier was wearing a green khaki t-shirt and an undershirt for the camouflage gears, which meant he'd completed his shift. Tien rubbed his eyes, drowsy, and answered a few breaths later. What's up, Sergeant? It's 5 a.m. Everyone's ready for the welcome ceremony and waiting for you in the yard. Please come with me or we'll miss the auspicious time. The city boy nodded and lazily stretched. He bent down to tie the laces of his sneakers. You don't have to make it a big deal. It's ACA tradition. They're being kind to you, so all you have to do is to accept the kindness. Don't overthink it. The soldier, who was at the same age as his father, gave him a wide grin as he was getting ready. Seeing you now in the light, you're just a boy. Ian lifted his hands to comb his messy hair, feeling nervous. Usually he always kept his appearance perfect from head to toes, with spotless and stylish clothes to appear well groomed. But here, being stripped of all decorations, he was just a normal guy who had recently grown out of his teenage years. He didn't know how to behave as the older soldier teased him with such kind-heartedness and friendliness. The flawless cheeks reddened with embarrassment and he changed the topic of the conversation. Why don't we just go straight to the village? Staff Sergeant Yod, who was taking the young man along the bypass to the back entrance, answered. The ceremony will be held at the village front. That's why we're taking a detour. The sun was setting down. The orange hue descended over the mountain ranges, and the cold air washed over the village. Jan pulled his jacket tight to keep warm. The temperature had dropped all of a sudden, yet he still felt warm because he was on his feet. He realized that once he stopped walking, he would be frozen until his jaws locked. The senior sergeant took him to a rocky slope and pointed upwards. You go up from there. It's not far, just half a kilometer. Once you see the village's entrance, you shout and ask for permission to enter. Aren't you coming with me? I can't. You have to go solo from here. I'll cut through the forest and join the others who are waiting for you up there. Keep your hands to yourself and do not touch anything. The sergeant spun around and headed into the dense forest before disappearing out of view. One could easily get lost on such a route if they weren't accustomed to it. Being left alone, Tien scratched his head, not knowing what to do for a good few minutes. He patted both cheeks to cheer himself up. Fuck it, he had come this far. Let's get going. The new volunteer teacher strode against the cold wind and light fog that was hanging low in the air. Darkness slowly crept in. The sound of tall grass rubbing on both sides of the track created a scene from a horror movie in his head. Tien sped up his paces that he could be running with the fright. At the end of the steep track, a long dark shadow cast downward. Once he got nearer, Tien saw that it was an arch made of strong wood poles. A thick beam sat atop, decorated with engravings in the shape of swords, birds, and reliefs. Near the pole stood two carved wooden statues that appeared to be a man and a woman. He gazed through the darkness deep into the arch. All he saw was rows of vaults leading to the entrance. He was surrounded by total silence, and no other souls were waiting for him as the soldier had mentioned. He suddenly felt chill and goosebumps as he now remembered a documentary about the hill tribe's belief in spirits and ghosts. The eerie solitude gave him a fright. He couldn't move his jaws as he was plagued by his own imagination and words got stuck in his throat. Tian pinched his eyes shut, digging nails into his palms to calm down. May, may I enter? Silence, like a ghost town. A few seconds later, he heard whispers in a peculiar native tongue, one he couldn't decipher. The voices echoed back and forth on the mountains that embraced this place. It appeared on his left, then right, and formed into a single, low hum that rose up around him. The place was haunted for real. Before the city boy would be shocked by terror, he heard a familiar deep voice. That's the loudest you can give? All his fear vanished right there, replaced by irritation. The last string of his patience snapped. Fuck, is this some kind of boot camp hazing? That giant sad poopa. Ian shouted back into the dark without a second thought. Just come get me! My balls are freezing! Everything fell into silence again as if they were translating his words. Then, loud laughter shot out from behind the dark. Dense thickets of trees, followed by flares of torches that lit up the whole space, chasing away the fear and the coldness from the freezing temperature. A group of men dressed in hand-woven indigo long-sleeved shirts with colorful embroideries in three rows at the hems emerged from the woods with wide, welcoming smiles on their faces. Ian was in no mood to socialize as he gave them a dry smile and darted through the entrance. He spotted some people in odd clothes along with Captain Pupa, Staff Sergeant Yod, and some soldiers he hadn't met before. Before he opened his mouth, Hama Bing Le and other young village men ushered him towards a big yard with a blazing campfire in the middle. Women who were fully dressed in skirts with similar patterns to the men's shirts, and pointy hats with a yarn bunch on top, decorated with silverware that jingled and chimed like bells as they moved, waited right there with children. Joel Ma, or the spiritual leader of the Aka village, stepped towards the newcomer. The wrinkles on his face exuded the air of sternness that demanded reverence, and Tien couldn't breathe from nervousness. The elder lifted an intimidating, convoluted, and bumpy wooden staff and swirled it around his face, chanting a mantra in a raspy yet powerful voice. At the last words, the staff with a surface that looked like toad skin nearly hit in the middle of his head. Tian tucked his neck and lifted his hands into a Y above his head, pleading and protecting himself at the same time. A thick hand gave him a soft pat on his back. Don't be afraid, teacher. Joel Ma is giving you a baby shower. Tama Bing Lei smiled, amused at the young man's alarming reaction. Hearing a sentence in a language he understood, the city boy's anxiety subsided. He lowered his arms and the tip of the staff stabbed him right in the middle of his forehead. It didn't hurt at all. Tian slowly pried his eyes open and looked at the elder who was smiling at him. He was a benevolent man after all. The younger man tapped his forehead and felt a sticky, wet substance on the tip of his finger. It's red lime. Jolma sealed it on you to protect you from the evil spirits in the woods. Yang Le explained, and Tian let out a big sigh of relief. The music from local instruments, led by a lajee or a reed-mouth organ in an odd shape, followed by a three-holed flute called "Shu and the tom-tom started playing. Even if it was a welcoming ceremony for the new volunteer teacher, the occasion was when young men and women in the village could have social interaction. They sang and danced around the campfire, and Tian was reminded of the scout camp. Ling Lei and the village elders bound colorful threads on each of his wrists as a blessing and the invitation for his spirit to reside within the body. They didn't use holy, white threads commonly seen in such ceremonies. It was unfamiliar and yet just as beautiful. Yen lifted his hands awkwardly to perform a Y, not being used to receiving kindness from strangers. They were from different worlds, in both languages and lifestyles. Then, the last man to give him a blessing showed up with a red and white tassel in his hand. He was still upset with being pranked to act like a fool at the entrance and slipped out the cutting words. Whose daughter are you married to? You have the right to be called one of them and give me this binding thread. The intense dark eyes glanced at him as the captain started winding the tassel around the fair skin. I did get offers to marry one, but I didn't say yes to anyone. The deadpan answer got on his nerves. It wouldn't hurt if you act a little humble, Captain. Captain Pupa didn't say a word, as if he was disinterested in nonsensical verbal ping-pong. He tied a loose knot, intended it to be easy to pull apart, but the yarn kept loosening up. Yen was tired of holding his hand up. It's all right. He can make it tighter. A new, soft, deep voice cut in. So you two can be bound to the next life? A tall, fair-skinned young man appeared by the captain's side. The witty, mischievous almond eyes behind silver frames stared at the yarn on Tian's wrist and blurted out, Red yarn? Well, well, my boy fool. You just want to get engaged to him right now, yes? He finished with a loud snicker. The captain, who finished tying the knot, turned to glare hotly at his friend. Cut the crap and get lost. I won't! The other man shot back and turned towards the new volunteer teacher, a slender and neat-looking young man. He gave Tian a sly smile. Hello, Nong Tian. I'm Wasan, a field doctor at the same camp as this monster. You can call me P. Dr. Nam like others do. Nong is a gender-neutral term meaning a younger sister or a younger brother. It is a term of endearment to show familiarity to someone younger than you, even if they are strangers. So he wasn't the only one who thought Pupa's height was unusual for average Thai men. Ken felt an instant affinity with the field military doctor. It seemed he had the same personality as Tei-Chin's, even if a bit more playful. Hello, P. Dr. Nam. He raised his hand to perform a Y without any hesitation. Pupa crossed his arms as he looked at the little mischief, but the big smile plastered all over his face, feeling irritated. Why was Tian acting out with him and made him want to whip that boy's buttocks with a stick, but behave with others? The young officer let out a heavy sigh. Come on, Uncle Bingley and everyone are waiting to have dinner with you. He gestured towards the litter that stood at the edge of the yard where all the village's elders were seating. Hama Bingley ordered his men to put another litter next to the first one so the soldiers could join in. Apart from Captain Pupa, Dr. Wasan, and Sergeant Yodchai, there were two other rangers from the militia. Usually the militia was local, and the two were familiar with the villagers because of the same tongue they shared. The young captain, who had been stationed at Pathrapiron operating base for years, spent enough time with the locals and blended it well enough he was considered one of them. It wasn't a surprise that the villagers gave him the honor to bind the newcomer's wrists as one of their respected elders. Staff Sergeant Yod even gave him an intel that it was Captain Pupa who pushed the educational programs for this Akha community so they would be literate in the Thai language. Knowing how to read and write would help them from being conned by city men, which was a common occurrence in the past. When the school was founded 4 years ago, the villagers flocked in to study. Once they were educated, the forward thinking youngsters went down to the city to find a job. The captain wondered if he'd made the right call, and the program almost got called off. But the poor kids, they just wanted to study. What's wrong with getting a job in the city? Once they earn more, they will have a better life, won't they? Tian asked, confused. Staff Sergeant Yod turned and gave him a knowing smile of someone who'd seen the world enough. If all of the young people leave and all that remains are the old and the children, can we still call it a village? The purpose of this school is to educate people in remote areas so the younger generation can develop their hometown and save it from being taken advantage of by investors or middlemen. At least they can communicate in Thai. Maybe they'll be gone for a while and return. He knew his opinion was too optimistic. Making money by doing less strenuous than farming? Who wants to come back? The response didn't come from Staff Sergeant Yod, but from someone who was mentioned in the conversation. The city lights are terrible, yet beautiful. Upcountry folks can't help but be drawn. Captain Fupa stared deep into the brown almond eyes. Besides, I haven't met any city people who can live with a quiet and glamorous life in the jungles. The straightforward statement made Tian turn away, and he looked at the local dishes that Uncle Bing's wife had put before him. The food on the woven bamboo tray looked delicious: grilled chicken, chili paste with half-boiled vegetables, plain soup, rice and sticky rice. Nothing out of the ordinary that he couldn't eat. My wife has cooked this dinner especially for you. Nam Prik Ong isn't too spicy. Here, have a try. Mama Bing Lip pushed the half-boiled vegetables towards VIP guests of tonight's dinner gathering. Nam Prik Ong is the popular chili paste in the north. Nam Prik means chili paste. Tian went silent, pondering something. Then he picked the most familiar veggie and dipped it in the chili paste that resembled spaghetti sauce. They even tasted similarly as he chewed on the food and gave it a compliment. Very delicious. But how did you know I don't eat spicy food? Yang Le didn't catch the calculating question and gave a straight answer. The cup, but a deep voice interrupted before he completed the word. The Akha put a handful of chili in their jungle food. A city boy like you won't be able to handle it. Pupa turns towards the village sheep. Is that right, Kama? Yes, that's right. If your tongue isn't used to the spices, you'll have an upset stomach. Yang Lei answered and forgot what he wanted to say a moment earlier. So, Nong Tien should have grilled chicken and a beer with me. The military doctor cut in, his voice slurred from the alcohol, and grabbed Tien's shoulder as he lifted an open can of beer towards the younger man. I told my guy to go down to the city at dawn to buy this just for you, you know? As the fermented yeast scent touched his nostrils, Tien's mouth watered. The former party boy had to say no to the alcoholic drink with a deep craving and regret. I can't drink. Are you kidding me? Toussaint looked at the man in his arm. The guy didn't appear to be prude. Had he misjudged the boy? I'm not kidding. I'm allergic to alcohol. It gives me rashes and I can't breathe. Tian gave a sheepish smile and put a ball of sticky rice into his mouth, being too aware of the intense, inquisitive stare from the poker-faced officer. Doc, don't overdose. You're a lightweight who just overestimates himself. Pupa pulled the arm around Tian's slender shoulder away, perhaps too forcibly because the drunken doctor swayed and dropped his head on the strong shoulder instead. Why is my head spinning? The fair-skinned doctor from a Thai Chinese family reddened up and he looked quite charming under the glistening light. The young captain shook his head, a slight smile tugging at the corners of his lips. He looked partly concerned. partly fed up. The new volunteer teacher looked up, caught the moment, and the chicken leg almost flew out of his mouth. A freaking Brokeback Mountain. Tien pushed the horror out of his mind as the captain pushed the doctor's slack head away, lolling towards the sergeant with a grunt. Who bought you the beer? I'm going to interrogate them all. Dr. Wasant was defeated by his own biological building blocks and passed out. His companion took the trouble in taking him back to the operating base before the party was over. Tian looked at the tall officer who was carrying his friend away. His mouth fell open as if to say something. Still, he didn't utter a word as the two shadows vanished into the darkness. But you said you'd see me later. The thin lips pressed tight into a line. What a moron. He lifted up a bowl of soup and put it to his lips, gulping with frustration. But that made Bingley's wife pleased with herself, and the village chief clapped his hands in delight, thinking the new teacher was enjoying the myriad of dishes specifically prepared for him. Tien's stomach was close to bursting. The clock struck at 9 p.m. Looking around, he saw how the villagers were turning to their home one by one since the farm work awaited them when roosters crowed at dawn. Only the elderly men stayed for more homemade booze and talked among themselves. Staff Sergeant Yod and the two rangers were hammered and were almost crawling on the ground. He didn't know how to handle them, so he left the matter to the villagers. Tian said good night to Kama Bing Le, whose central dialect was leaving him as the night went on, and quietly left the culture yard. This Akka community was small and simple, yet Tian didn't have any trouble finding his way back to his lodging. He followed the torches that were lit along the route and spotted the tiny roof of his hut once he passed the other houses. Then he stopped in his track. The hut was lit. It meant someone went in without his permission. Having a rash judgment, it didn't occur to him that if it was really a thief, he would be in danger. Tian's slender form strode up the stairs and he yanked open the woven bamboo door and he got stunned by what he saw. The intruder, who was kneeling in front of the kerosene lamp, slowly turned towards him. "Ca- Captain!" Tian stuttered and Pupa frowned at him. Why was the boy acting as if he was seeing a ghost? I refilled the benzene for you. You can turn the lamp off if you're not using it. You know that? The officer showed him how to turn off the valve, not caring whether the other man was listening. Tian couldn't hold back his smile. He rubbed his face a few times to calm down and ask, how did you get here? With the motorcycle. Surprisingly, he wasn't annoyed with that crisp, deadpan answer like he normally was. Haven't you returned to the base with Dr. Nam? The young captain fell into a brief silence before saying something that made Tian's heart skip a beat. But I gave you my word. What about the doctor? He was throwing up in his room. Lupa started to lose his temper. Are you worried about him? Tian pulled a wry face, annoyed. It was you who was worried about him. Too worried. The captain pondered why the city boy started a fight with him and came to a sudden realization. You thought I forgot about the promise. The words shot right through him, and the smooth cheeks reddened. Tian's mouth fell open before he blurted out. What? Me? No way! How could you even think that way? Seeing how the younger man vehemently rejected the statement, Pupa shook his head lightly, murmuring, Kid. Tian was so embarrassed and wished the earth would swallow him whole. He decided to change the subject before the other man cornered him again. You said you'd teach me how to hang the mosquito net. Pupa rose to his feet without putting up any more fight. He pulled the ropes that hung the net loosely. It's easy. Just pull the four corners and tie them tight. He waited for the newbie teacher to try, but the other man didn't move. I don't want to mess things up. The net's old. I don't want to break it. So, you want me to do it for you? The officer aimed at sarcasm, but didn't expect Yen to give him quick nods. Pupa let out a heavy sigh and nimbly pulled the net straight. When you're going to bed, tuck in the four corners under the mattress so the insects cannot crawl in. Is he blind or something? The holes are bigger than the insects. Tian lowly muttered to himself, but the captain's head whipped around. What did you just say? Nothing. Tian waved his hand, quickly rebuffing. What should I do next? Ufa cast him a suspicious glance but went on giving the instruction. Once you wake up, you roll up the corners and rest them on top of the net to keep them off the floor. He gave a demonstration by pulling the tips of the net and rolling them to rest in the middle of the rectangular frame. If I pull the net down and tuck it under the mattress, won't it trap all the mosquitoes inside? Well, there's a simple solution. Just use the blanket to brush them away. The captain picked up a blanket, swung it in the air, then pulled down the four corners again to tuck under the mattress. First, you tuck in three corners. You can finish the last one when you're going to bed. This will leave no opening when you want to go in and out of the net. The man was meticulous just like his dad. Even after his retirement, the former general still neatly folded his blanket and placed it at the end of the bed every morning. Tian whistled to the impeccable work before him. Thanks a lot, Captain, for your mosquito net services. I'm going to brush my teeth and wash my face at the jar at the back of the hut, since the water is now so full. He emphasized the last words to imply that he already found out about everything from Kama Bingley. It took a while for Captain Pupa to realize that he had been duped by the rascal to do all the work for him. The boy even taunted him for making him walk to the waterfall to bathe. Yet Yen was already humming happily as he left the hut. The handsome face twisted as the officer balled his fists. He would have punched a hole in the fragile floor right now if he could. Finally came the day to start working as a volunteer teacher. Hama Bingley took a breakfast pinto to the new teacher's hut at 7 a.m., only to find that he was still wearing the clothes from the previous night. Tian smiled sheepishly at the village chief. He really tried to take a bath, but the earthen jar made the water too freezing for him, so he only washed his face and brushed his teeth. The weather here is quite cold, he said, trying to hide his embarrassment. You'll get used to it. It's going to be even colder next month. It's going to be colder? Tian grimaced. He always turned on the water heater at home, and this place didn't even have electrification. How long could he survive? In some coldest years, the temp drops down below zero. Yang Lei made it sound worse to tease the young man who was curling up into a ball. How could you handle it? By not taking a bath? The village chief laughed. We'd all get eczema if we don't. Here's what we do. We boil the water and mix with the room temperature water, and we get the warm water. You've got a stove under the hut, haven't you? I saw it, but I don't know how to use it, he confessed. Don't worry. I'll tell Captain Pupa to teach you how to light the fire. Hearing the captain's name, the boy scowled. Why him? You can teach me yourself. Because the captain takes good care of you, and I don't want to steal his job. Bingley answered humorously, but it made the younger man scowl deepen. Ken didn't want to argue, so he started munching on the food, freshly cooked, hot boiled rice with tons of vegetables, and caring if his tongue would get blisters. Tama Bingley took the new volunteer teacher along the route that led to a small school where children in Papandao and nearby villages studied together. It was located on a high spot on the cliff that was a kilometer on foot to reach. After a while, Ken heard the Thai national anthem with a slight accent coming from the distance. The rectangular flag that was waving above the thick scrub ahead made him stop in his track, looking up. Thai national flag. The old faded flag that had been used for a long time slowly slid up the pole, which was a simple bamboo stalk with a pulley. It was a familiar sight, but how many people knew the real meaning of this flag? Our ancestors loved this land, you know, Bingley asked, seeing how the younger man was standing still. He stepped closer with a proud look on his face. Without this land, you wouldn't have a home, and would have become vagabonds, someone without nationality and safety. This must be a different world, people had talked about. He remembered the time from elementary school to high school where students were forced to stand in the yard under the scorching sun just to sing the national anthem every morning. He remembered cursing at the rules and regulations that made his student life so unpleasant. He never appreciated it all and never understood why. He even made a plan with his friends to take down the flag from the pole and hide it. Yet the people who lived in the remotest outback were contented to have a chance to sing the Thai national anthem. Let's go. The children are waiting to meet you. Many of them came here today just to see you. Papandao village chief patted the skinny back to signal that it was time to move again. Even if it was called a school, it was something beyond his comprehension. The school was a mill with bamboo structures and a tack roof. The three walls were made of strips of split bamboos with a hole as a window on each side to let the light in, and the fourth wall was covered with a medium-sized blackboard. The floor was covered with mats. 10 makeshift desks stood inside without chairs, and the students had to sit cross-legged on the floor to study. The children lined up in front of the flagpole, from the tallest to the smallest ones, with two rangers Tian had met last night standing nearby. All of them were staring at the new teacher with hopeful eyes. Seeing the innocent eyes shining with a bright hope, Tian was struck by a sudden nervousness and turned towards Bingley. Um, he said there were many, but what I saw wasn't more than 20. This is already quite a number, teacher. The children need to help the parents work the field. On some good days, you'll be lucky enough if 5 of them could show up to the class. Tian nodded, not wanting to argue, and stepped to stand next to the flagpole along with the older man. Tama Bingley announced something in Akha native tongue that he understood nothing of, but he knew it was about his presence. Later, the children flocked into the classroom and sat down on the floor as well-behaved students did. Let's get inside. Ming Le led him to the blackboard, where a box of white chalk was placed on a bookshelf nearby. Please introduce yourself, Yama told the younger man. But I can speak only on the central dialect. They'll understand. Some of them are fluent in Thai, especially the tallest one over there. Bing Lei gestured towards a boy at the back of the classroom. He wasn't older than 15. Tian rubbed his neck. His throat felt like lead and he was unable to utter a word. He didn't see himself as a teacher, not mentally or physically, yet he had to introduce himself as one. I'm. My name is Tian. I'm from Bangkok. Nice to meet you. Sawadee Kap and Sawadee Ka came from the children, and suddenly his heart swelled. Now, each of you should introduce yourself to Kru Tian. Being Liz spoke in Thai, and the Aka kids took a turn to say their names. Some were in their native language, and some were in Thai. The village chief had told him earlier that some parents had worked in the city and gave their children a Thai name in their birth certificate. Rutien, I need to excuse myself. The school finishes at 3 p.m., but if you want them to do some extra activities, just tell them when. The village chief gave the new teacher an encouraging smile. It was obvious this was his first job. The elderly man excused himself to leave, waving his hand goodbye, and Tien stood awkwardly with a dozen pairs of curious eyes staring at him. Hmm, he didn't know where to start. Maybe the alphabet? Gao, Gai, Topor? Nokhook? He hadn't written down the first to the last alphabet in ages. How could he recall all of them now? The first alphabet in Thai language, Gai, Chick, and the last, Nokhok or an owl. The system is similar to saying A, ant, and Z, zebra. Most Thai people have trouble remembering all the alphabets in order. But before the staring contest went on any further, a girl spoke up in a clear, tiny voice. Rutian! Is Tian the same word as Sitian? The man who stood still in front of the class processed the question and answered. No, he didn't know how to explain, so he turned around and wrote on the blackboard with chalk, something that was rarely used in schools in Bangkok nowadays. The word "sitian" means crayon in Thai language. In Thai, which is an abugida or alphabetic writing system, the words are pronounced the same but written differently. The slender fingers moved the white chalk slowly, not used to it, and contorted Thai alphabets appeared on the board. Tien, this is how it's written, with a different spelling. It means a prophet. What color is a prophet? A prophet means a wise one. He tried his best to keep the explanation concise, yet the kid still didn't get it. Why can't it be a Sitian? Tian mentally raised a white flag. Alright, it's a Sitian. You're Sitian! The other kids who pressed their ears to the conversation blurted the name out in unison with giggles. So, what are we going to learn today? The children seemed to be accustomed to the new teacher, hence the second question. What to learn? The city boy stood stunned as the words of Kru Vinais, the director of Sing Tong Foundation, echoed in his mind. Children's ages varied greatly here, so it was problematic to construct a study plan to fit all of them. What did the previous teacher teach you? It was an easy way out, but the Hill Tribe students spoke up at once, trying their best to give him the answers, and his head started to spin. Tian lifted his hands to stop them. Tomorrow, you guys take your notebooks with the homework assigned by the previous teacher to me. Once the children nodded, he let out a long sigh of relief. It seemed he was going to make it today after all. Tian looked around and spotted a glass cabinet with drawing books and boxes of crayons inside. A light bulb went off on his head. Alright, this is the first day we met, so I want to get to know you better. He called the students of varying ages to sit down in a circle and put pieces of paper with crayons in the middle that they could share. I want you to draw a family picture for me. When you finish it, you can go home. We will meet again tomorrow. That's it. The Aka children's eyes asked the question as they looked at Bruce Tian, puzzled. Yet they began drawing as told. Tian watched as the children started drawing pictures on the papers with the crayons and stepped away from the circle to sit down on the window frame that was as high as his waist, feeling tired. The cool breeze on the cliff wiped away the sweat from his smooth forehead, and the edginess he'd felt earlier. Outside, the two rangers were patrolling as if a terrorist attack could break out on the steep hill at any given moment. Ken rose up to walk and sat down many times for an hour or so when a boy nudged at him. He remembered the boy's name to be Ai, age 14, and he was the biggest boy in class. Here's my homework. The boy's accent was flawless. Perhaps he had studied with many volunteer teachers since the birth of the school. Uh, thanks. Dan took the paper and saw the drawing of a mountain range with the sun in the middle. A house stood in the left corner with human figures holding hands on the right, a family portrait. Yet, apart from the figures wearing Akha costumes with the unique rectangular patterns, there was also a man in a camouflage uniform and a young woman in a long robe with a flower behind her ear. Who's this? He pointed at the soldier figure, curious. It's Captain Pupa. Why is he in the picture? Dad told me the captain always help us out, so his family too. The boy answered honestly. Who's this girl? He pointed at the other figure that stood out from the rest. Crufun. The name that came out of Ai's mouth vaguely reminded him that Thorfinn had written about an Akha family of one student that had taken her under their wings during her time at Papandao. They told her to call them Ada or Dad and Ama or Mom. Did you miss Crufun? He didn't know what made him ask that. The boy's innocent eyes made him miserable. Did they know that their beloved teacher couldn't return? Not in this lifetime? I nodded. I do, but she promised that she'll be back as soon as she can. The boy's answer sent a chill down his spine. It's waiting in vain without any miracle. Ken absent-mindedly lifted his hand to touch his left chest. In fact, she had returned to them, but only in the form of his heart. Chrissy Tien! The one who called him was a girl who had given him the new nickname. The tiny little one ran towards him. It's done! Two soiled hands thrust her proudest work at him. Tien frowned as he saw the exact same characters like the ones Ai had drawn. Who are these figures? Miju! The little one pointed at herself, then at the bigger boy next to her. Pie! She started pointing at each figure that was drawn in an even lines. This is Dad, Mom, Captain Poopa, and Crew Fun. So, these two were siblings. The city boy came to an understanding that he couldn't really tell who was related to who, since all of them looked the same to him. He would believe if they told him the whole village were cousins. Ai, Miju, now that you've handed your assignments, you may go home. I'll see you tomorrow, alright? Miju smiled widely, happy, and turned to speak to her brother in their native dialect. Aye raised his hands to wide the new teacher and took his sister's hand as they left. It was the afternoon when the other dozen children finally completed their tasks. We finished early, one of the rangers said as he peered into the empty classroom. Yan smiled sheepishly. How could he tell him that he didn't prepare any material? The first lesson starts tomorrow, but are military guards really necessary? He asked what he was wondering about. The young ranger was quiet, as if to think. We're at the borders. It's not somewhere we can call safe. That vague answer didn't bother him. Ken collected all the papers and picked a few textbooks from the cabinet to bring home with him. He left the school with the two rangers who took him home before returning to the operating base kilometers away. End of chapter 5.